For today's webinar, it's titled Farmworkers and COVID-19 Crisis, a conversation with Lauren Ornelas. And I'm very excited to introduce everybody to Lauren Ornelas, in case you haven't met her before, haven't seen her speak before. Lauren is the founder and president of the Food Empowerment Project, or F.E.P, a vegan food justice nonprofit that promotes veganism, fights for farm workers, works on lack of access to healthy foods in communities of color, and encourages people not to buy chocolate sourced from the worst forms of child labor. She has been active in the animal rights movement since 1987, having started the first high school animal rights group in San Antonio, Texas, and then Action for Animals, a group she launched in college and is still active in Austin. In 1999, Lauren was asked by Viva UK to start and run Viva USA. And as the leader of Viva USA, Lauren investigated factory farms and ran consumer campaigns working with activists nationwide. In cooperation with other activists, Lauren persuaded Trader Joe's to stop selling duck meat, convinced Pier 1 Imports to stop using feathers, and was a spark that got the CEO of Whole Foods Market to become vegan. She also helped the construction of an industrial dairy operation in California. She has a great TEDx talk available online called Entitled The Power of Food that you can check out. And you can also check out veganmexicanfood.com, foodispower.org, and veganfilipinofood.com. So I'm very excited again to welcome Lauren Ornelas to talk with us a little bit about farm workers, especially right now during COVID-19. Hi, Lauren.
Hi, thanks for having me, Jose, and thanks to everybody for joining in with us today. We know it's an interesting and overwhelming and exhausting day, so thank you.
Great. So we want to start off this webinar and just talking a little bit more about Food Empowerment Project, the work you do on a regular basis, and sort of how your work has especially been shaped in the past few months. Can you talk a little bit about Food Empowerment Project and sort of the work and your focus there?
Sure. Our work is basically broken down into 4 program areas. One is veganism for the animals. As a vegan for over 30 years, it is one of the main issues of a just food system is the non-oppression of non-human animals. And so we promote veganism in a variety of ways, primarily focusing on promoting veganism in different communities. So I'm Hispanic, so we do a lot for the Mexican community. My colleague's Filipino. We're doing a lot in the Filipino community, as well as one of our board members is Lao, and making sure that we're going to be coming up with a website for vegan Lao food. So we really do a lot of outreach on veganism geared to people with different cultural backgrounds. And as a vegan organization, we also make sure that we advocate for the rights of farm workers, because in promoting a vegan diet, we're encouraging people to eat more fruits and vegetables, and we want to make sure that the people who pick our fruits and vegetables are treated with dignity and respect as well. We're trying to get more access to healthy foods in Black and Brown communities, and we do this primarily by going and doing actual surveying and making assessments on the availability of healthy foods. Currently, our work is in Vallejo, California, but we are doing another community soon. But we're really trying to find solutions that empower the community. And again, our last area of work is trying to get people not to buy chocolate sourced from slavery and child labor. And to that, we have a list of chocolates we do and don't recommend. Every company has to make a vegan chocolate to make our list. And we also have it in free apps. So the whole goal is just showing how various issues are connected, and that, you know, to have people recognize the power of their food choices to make this world a better place.
That's awesome. You talked a little bit about the surveys, how you survey these communities to learn more about their food access stuff. What does that entail? What does that mean? Do you go out into different homes? Do you measure based on more economic factors or studies or anything like that? Or how do you measure that?
So basically, we've done it in 2 different ways. In Santa Clara County, we compared high-income area and low-income areas. In Vallejo, we did the entire community. And what we do is we physically survey for access to fresh fruits and vegetables, canned, frozen, as well as meat and dairy alternatives, also asking other questions. And we make sure that our survey tool is culturally appropriate. So when we started doing work from Santa Clara, we started doing work in Vallejo. Vallejo was Latinx, Filipinx, and Black. Our survey tool had to be adjusted because in Santa Clara County, it was predominantly the Latinx community. So we had to do focus groups to make sure that the fruits and vegetables of people in that community would be included. So we survey every establishment, then we make an assessment, with crunching all the numbers. We work with local universities for that. And then we follow up when we do focus groups in the community to understand the barriers they have accessing healthy foods, as well as some solutions that they might have in mind as well. And when we do this, we feed everybody a vegan meal, and we also pay them $50 for their time, because what they're sharing is knowledge and it's valuable. And so we want to make sure to compensate people for that. And then we just talk about some of the solutions. And so right now, one of the things that we're trying to do is work to get a worker-owned cooperative in the community, such as Mandela Grocery in Oakland, California.
Awesome. That's a really interesting aspect of it, is that especially when a lot of these studies are done or a lot of these analytics are done, is that the respondents are not compensated for their time, because even though you are getting information that will hopefully benefit them, that still requires a lot of time and resource on their part in order to answer these questions.
Exactly. And when you're talking about people who are impacted, that time is money. If we're asking them to take out time from their families or from their jobs, that we need to make sure to compensate them for that. And one of the things we do as well in trying to make a difference is we really fight for living wages, because the only way that everybody's going to have equity and access to healthy foods is that they have the amount of money to be able to buy that food and that produce.
Yeah, that's a really interesting aspect. I've learned a lot about Food Empowerment Project's work over the past few years, and that's very sort of intersectional, that aspect of it, because a lot of animal rights organizations, animal advocacy organizations, or very organizations that promote veganism, promote these options and encourage people to switch to plant-based options, right? But don't acknowledge or address a lot of those issues in terms of food access, food security, where we can encourage people, organizations, or individuals to go vegan, go vegetarian. But if the people in these communities don't have access to those options, or to have the ability or cultural access to these things, it's obviously much a barrier of entry, or harder for them to make that change.
Exactly. And that's why we try to ask people not to say things like it's easy to go vegan, when we know it's not easy for everybody to go vegan. And so with the work that we do, it's like it's a good situation in terms of justice in and of itself, right? Everybody should be able to access healthy food so they can thrive, their families can thrive, and they're healthy. And the more people are able to switch over to plant-based foods, then the less impact it has on non-human animals as well. So there's only positive that comes out of it.
What kind of responses do you see among the people that you survey, or people, these communities that you talk to, when you're approaching them about both the vegan side of it, but also the food access side of it?
We're kind of talking to another community right now about working with them. And, I keep on saying, don't forget we're vegan, so what we're going to be serving for. And they don't care. When we were asked by David Hilliard, one of the founding members of the Black Panther Party, to do our work in Vallejo, I said, okay, don't forget we're a vegan group. And he's like, I should probably be vegan anyway. So they don't really have any issues with it. I mean, they're excited to try the food. They want more produce. They want more healthy foods in their communities, and they know it's something that they don't have. So, we haven't really had any pushback from the communities, even the policymakers that we work with in those communities, knowing that we're a vegan organization. They understand the work that we're doing is important.
And so right before this call, with the webinar started, you were talking a little bit about your work today, and providing supplies to some farm workers and stuff. Can you talk a little bit about that, and a little bit more about what that has been like over the past few months during this COVID pandemic?
Sure. I mean, the work that Food Empowerment Project does with farm workers in terms of our school supply drive that we do, or food, or what other donations we do, we don't see it as an act of charity. We see it specifically as a way to help right an injustice that's taking place to farm workers. Not only are they feeding vegans, but they're feeding everybody in this country. Unless you grow your own food, you have a farm worker to thank for it. So we see this work as a way to thank them for feeding us, and to help right an injustice that's taking place because of the horrible conditions in which they live and they work and they endure on a daily basis. So today we got some additional school supplies. We had already delivered school supplies to the indigenous farm workers here in Sonoma County, but we got more. And so we were able to drop those off today, along with some clothes, as well as some soccer balls that were donated as well. So on a day-to-day where, the results of the election are coming out, and, Black, brown, indigenous people, the LGBTQ community, the Muslims in this country feeling not safe, it felt really good to have the ability to let the farm workers know we were thinking of them and how much they mean to us.
Right.
And in terms of our work in general, since COVID and stuff, definitely was impacted. When COVID started in March, when the lockdown started, we reached out to the communities we work with and asked them, what do you need right now? And the first thing, because their kids were now having to be at home, not being able to go to school, the first thing they asked for was, we need some school supplies for our kids who were trying to learn here at home. Then we got them some school supplies right away. Then we asked, okay, is there anything else you need? And it's heartbreaking, but the reality is the people who pick our food needed food because they don't have enough money on a regular basis, much less with erratic schedules. So we did, thanks to anybody who's on here who donated to our drive for our essential workers. Again, essential workers such as farm workers who aren't paid very well and suffer from a lot of abuses. We were able to send over $10,000 of food and masks. So here in Sonoma County, where the farm worker organization we work with, MCUI, they're indigenous. So they just wanted fresh produce. They just wanted fruits and vegetables. The farm workers in the Central Valley, we sent them, all the food we send is vegan. We sent them food. And then we sent money to a couple organizations, one in Washington, one in North Carolina, so that simply they could buy masks for the workers because they weren't getting them from their employers.
Yeah. And somebody in the Ask chat if this was just for plant-based farmers or for all farmers.
This is farm workers.
Farm workers.
So it's farm workers. Here it's produce workers. The farm workers that we work with are produce workers. Some are in the winery industry, and some are the ones in Florida were in the tobacco industry. But Flock, ironically, the organization we work with, their executive director is vegan, so he kind of gets it all. But anyway, yeah, we give to produce workers. And again, we're not giving to farmers, we're giving to farm workers.
Thank you for clarifying that. That is a very upsettingly staggering point, the idea of that farm workers not having access to fruits and vegetables or not having the resources in order to do that. People who work literally day in, day out, procuring these foods and ensuring that everyday citizens, individuals can buy these foods and not being able to afford it themselves is horrifying.
Yeah, it is, definitely.
And somebody asked also as well, they asked for a link where they can, if there was a link to where they can continue to contribute to essential workers, and which we'll talk about that when we get to a little bit towards the end, how we as individuals can make some of those changes and how we can support organizations and the kind of work that we can do as individuals. We'll talk a little bit more about farm workers now, though, especially with the communities that you work with. What is the usual constituency or demographic makeup of these workers so that the people who are tuning in have a little bit more knowledge of understanding of who these workers are?
Sure, it's a great question. So here in Sonoma County, the farm workers that we work with are indigenous. So they don't speak English and they don't speak Spanish. They're speaking their indigenous languages of Mexico. And so when things like COVID hit, when the fires hit, a lot of services that are available are not getting to them. And I know we'll talk about the fires later, but an example is that when the fires hit and people needed to be evacuated, MCUI sent some of their members from Napa County to Sonoma County. If you don't know the area, it's kind of big areas and distance to get people to evacuate because the services that come in on your phone are in English or in Spanish. And, so they face additional barriers. They face additional language justice issues. But they also face, unfortunately, more discrimination than maybe regular farm workers would as well. And there are men and women who are working in the field.
Are these indigenous farm workers, are they U.S. citizens? Are they immigrants?
Mixed. A lot are undocumented. The vast majority of farm workers we assist are undocumented workers. So therefore, they're not with a union. And then not receiving a lot of benefits, but they are working.
Right.
They are working every day.
Right. Can you describe a little bit about what their work is actually like on a day-to-day basis, sort of what a farm worker actually does and sort of what their work constitutes?
Sure. I mean, I think it's going to be different for everybody, but I would say that generally they're waking up very early in the morning, which to get to work. If they have children, they'll be dropping them off with somebody to take care of them. and then they will travel with other people, which is one of the reasons why. And they'll travel in vehicles together primarily because a lot of these farm workers don't have money to have cars of their own. Sometimes the employers will supply them. Other times they're using public transportation. And then they get to the location of where they're working, and they are working in extreme temperatures. They're bending over. They're being exposed to agricultural chemicals. Many women suffer abuse in the fields. But they could be picking or snapping the strawberries. They are possibly harvesting grapes, and they work all day long. Some won't have, again, it depends on where you are in California. But a lot of times they're given maybe a 10-minute break. And in order to get over to where the water is, by the time they get there, it would already be too late for them to walk back. So if they have a 10-minute break, it may take them 10 minutes to go walk to the water. So they don't go and get things like water. By law now they're supposed to be getting shade, but there's not a lot of enforcement there. So you have farm workers who collapse in the fields. And if we want to talk about COVID a little bit, some of this is why. So where I am in Sonoma County, the Latinx community is maybe 20. Because I don't know specifically, but let's say 27 to 30% of the population here. But we are the Latinx community is, 60+% of those infected with COVID. And that's because when you consider farm workers, which is where a lot of the outbreaks have taken place, because of the fact that they aren't paid well, they have cramped living conditions and cramped working conditions and cramped transportation conditions. I'm on the Latinx work group for Sonoma County's health department. And, it's one of these things constantly when you have the language barriers and people who maybe aren't trained even in Spanish very well, that is causing some of the problems, at least, that we've had in Sonoma County.
Right. And are you seeing the same sort of rates of COVID infection rates among farm workers is similar to like the population you mentioned, the 68%? Or is it higher in some places?
I know more about Sonoma County because that's
Right.
the task force I'm on. So I don't know, but I do know, just from reading and watching things that, the farm worker community does have higher rates. And
Right.
to be honest, like all essential workers do, right? So the people who are working fast food and at the grocery stores, who tend to be Black and brown people, tend to have higher rates. And again, when you look at COVID, you have to add in, there's like a lot of stressors involved
Right.
that impact your ability to, unfortunately, contract it. And so you have things that aren't necessarily going to come up in a blood test, like stress, hunger, environmental racism in your community where you're already impacted by negative pollutants in the community. So a lot of these factors, lack of sleep, all of these aren't going to come out in a blood work to tell you who is or is not more susceptible, but it could impact somebody's ability to fight off infections and such.
Right. So in addition to just having the cramped conditions, the long work hours, close spaces, and things like that, things that are already hazardous and potentially impact the rates of transmission, make them higher. You also have these other factors that you might not be able to quantify or measure, but we do know that they can affect these COVID transmission rates or the health impact of these long-term workers, right?
Absolutely.
Right. Somebody in the question asked if you happen to know the average annual income for a produce worker in California, or either among perhaps some of the workers that you work with.
It's a great question. There are numbers out there and they vary. I don't happen to know what it is. Sorry about that. I don't. I know the average lifespan of a farm worker is 49 years old.
49 years old? Yeah, so that's obviously much shorter than a normal American lifespan.
I'm 50, so yeah.
And is that again because of the conditions that they're working in, the lack of shade, the
conditions they're working? I mean, it takes a toll on their bodies. You also understand that like they're being exposed to agricultural chemicals, on a regular basis. The fact that they are living in areas where they may not have running water, they aren't able to eat well. So there's a lot of factors there. You have, sometimes 16 people living in a one bedroom.
Right.
Because they're not being paid right.
Do you think that the the current events and the COVID pandemic is bringing more attention to farm workers' rights, or do you think they're being overlooked in some of these cases?
It's hard because in some regards, I'm like in a bubble, right? So I read stuff all the time about farm workers and I'm like, people are getting it. Oh yeah, they are essential workers. How are we still eating during this pandemic when we're all locked down? Oh, they're not locked down. They're
Right.
still feeding us. But then when the fires hit and you had the wineries getting the farm workers to work in mandatory evacuation zones, you realize that the bottom line is all that matters. All that they care about is profit. They don't care about what's happening to these workers. And I feel like, like with so much stuff right now, we saw it with Black Lives Matter, that gets public attention and then it goes,
Right.
So I don't right now, I feel again like there isn't being enough talked about in terms of farm workers again. So
Right.
thank you for doing this where we could talk about some of these issues.
Yeah, of course. We're glad that you're able to join us and want to talk about these issues, because that is something that FFAC, we do acknowledge when we give presentations, when we focus on animal agriculture. At least personally, I always in every presentation, we're letting people know that we acknowledge that our presentation focuses on animal agriculture and that we're encouraging people to eat vegan, plant-based, but we don't have time in our presentations to address the farm worker stuff. So we want to make sure we have space for that or start incorporating that more, and try to educate people more about that, because we're, obviously as vegans, we're consuming a lot of these produce and contributing to the system.
Thank you.
Speaking a little bit of the fires, can you talk a little bit about how it impacted farm workers, especially here in California? Obviously, for as is now happens every year, it becomes part of the seasons as much as spring and fall. We now have a fire season where we have whole days or weeks where the air quality is in the red and we can't go outside or anything. But obviously, if you're an office worker, if you're like myself who works from home, have the opportunity to stay in home and to filter, I don't experience some of the harmful effects as much as farm workers do. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of conditions they're experiencing and how it's impacting their health?
Sure. And I think that one of the things too to remember is that those of us who live in this area, we're actually packed and ready to evacuate. I've been packed since one of the fires came close to us, and I won't unpack until the first rainfall. So the constant threat and fear of the fires is something that those of us who live in these areas deal with day to day, much less farm workers who know if they have to be evacuated, how is that going to impact their work as well? So when the fires hit this most recent time, the organization we work closely with, MCUI, they were very quick to get their people into safety. Those farm workers don't feel safe in the shelters. That's not what they're used to. So what they did is they had some land in Napa and people were living in tents outside. But like I said before, that the wineries were getting, the agricultural industry here got a loophole to allow them to get workers to work in mandatory evacuation zones. So zones where the public was told you must leave. They were getting permits to say, no, farm workers are allowed to go in those areas so they can work, which is beyond disgusting and disgraceful. Again, farm workers are treated as if they aren't human beings. Right. And that's one of the biggest problems, right? That people say, the work that farm workers do, I could never do that. As if farm workers are somehow superhuman versus the fact that they're literally just doing everything that they can do to survive. And that's why they're working so hard and putting up with what they're putting up with. But farm workers here, many of them chose to live outside along the rivers. They needed food. And again, a lot of the announcements didn't make it to the farm workers. So a lot of them, it wasn't as bad as I think the fire that was in 2017, where a whole bunch of places were wiped out. In terms of Sonoma County, but it definitely has impacted the farm workers and their ability to work. They are forced to work out, even when the smoke is so bad, we're told to stay indoors, they're still working outside. And that's throughout the state of California, including Southern California as well.
Were these workers provided with any like mask filtration system, N95s or anything like that while they were working?
So that's the interesting thing. So some workers, what we understand is that a lot of the workers were not. The employers were saying they were providing them, but when organizations went out there, the farm workers didn't have them. And some farm workers were saying, hey, look, working with an N95 is really, really hard. So if they weren't paid by how much they picked and they could work slower, it would have been easier for them. But instead, a lot of these farm workers are paid by how much they pick. And again, to that question that we had, some get paid hourly, some get paid by how much they pick. So these farm workers were saying, look, if you pay me hourly, then I can wear this and I'll be okay. But if you're paying me per pound, then it's going to be a lot harder for me.
Right. And that seems to be like a recurring issue with a lot of these farm workers, is kind of having to sacrifice their health in order to make that income, in order to continue to support themselves and support their families, even though their wages are not what maybe they should be for someone who's doing that kind of work.
Exactly.
Somebody asked, does it take outreach programs to go out in the field to reach workers directly, and even though they are wary, since many of them are undocumented? So for these resources to get out there for the evacuation notices and stuff that don't have access to them, especially with a lot of these workers who work in more or less accessible areas, right, more remote rural areas, do the resources and these kind of like announcements or things like that, are they, how do they receive that information? How can they contact, especially if they are Indigenous and don't have a language translator or something like that?
So MCUI has some material. Again, a lot of it's going to be verbal. A lot of the languages are verbal. And so they'll have radio. They have a radio station. I personally think we need to, I'm going to be talking more about figuring out ways to support that more and support other ways, because they're going to be more trusted to communicate with than, say, the county or the sheriff's department who runs Nixle. So it's going to be a lot better for them to hear from a community that they know is vested in their well-being.
Right. And somebody else also asked, these farm workers being given any benefits like health, medical, time off?
No, they're not. That's, again, I say that because the vast majority don't, right? In fact, there was a bill in the state of California. I don't want to say the wrong number, but it was up in order to make sure that people who were, had to need to sick time, like emergency sick time to take care of themselves or a loved one due to COVID, to help workers, and they explicitly took farm workers out of it. Now, farm workers just started getting paid overtime. Well, theoretically, there was a bill that passed, and I think somebody vetoed it, but it recently, Newsom signed it. It was a couple years ago. But again, it's a matter of enforcement, and is it really happening? But for the most part, farm workers don't get paid health insurance. They definitely don't get sick days or vacation days.
Do you know why the farm workers were exempt from the previous thing you mentioned?
Because, well, my assumption is that farm workers are, unfortunately, food is I want to say cheap for the most part, right? Like, we're not paying the true value of our food in this country. And so there's the biggest cost that the agriculture industry has is labor. So California is not only the state in the U.S. that feeds the U.S., it also feeds people outside of the U.S. as well. And so I think it's just a matter of what that would mean. And again, I feel strongly that they are trying to create a cycle of poverty here, and with farm workers. You give them as little as possible, they're going to keep doing this work.
Right. I think that's something you touched upon that's very interesting, that I feel like even as a Californian myself, and have lived here my whole life and don't understand the scale of the agricultural system here in this state alone, in particular, like not just that we feed the rest of the country, but also the world, where some of the crops and products that we grow in this state are shipped worldwide. So can you talk a little bit about that, if you have any information about some of the more popular crops?
What I can say, though, about the agriculture industry in California is it is tremendously strong. So I helped to pass the law to ban the sale and production of foie gras in California. And after we were successful in passing that, we then decided to try and get a law to ban, I think there was a farmer who had thrown live hens in a wood chipper. So we decided to try to get a law passed that would ban the suffocation, the burning, and the wood chipping of birds alive and buried alive. Because we were thinking of the chicks, because sometimes the male chicks are sometimes buried alive. So we tried to get that piece of legislation, And we couldn't even get it out of committee. I had someone from the poultry industry even tell me that they wanted to be able to have the right to burn the birds alive if they wanted to in this committee. And in this meeting with the author, we couldn't get it out of it. We couldn't get anywhere. And that's how strong the agriculture industry is, even though they aren't, to some degree, burning these birds alive. If they wanted to have the ability to, they wanted to make sure that that wasn't taken away from them. Any inch that we could take. And, we were lucky with the foie gras bill that we didn't go through the ag department. We went through a different committee in order to get that passed.
Yeah, that's such a stark idea of the agricultural industry having such legislative power, particularly in the state where something like burying these male chicks alive is, at least to me, and maybe people tuning in now and listening to this, kind of seems like such a very common sense idea of let's not do that, let's not allow that to happen, and to have it be stopped before it even becomes a bill, or have it to not even get anywhere close to that. It's just it's very upsetting, obviously, but it does show you the power of this industry.
Yep, very powerful industry. It's frightening.
I do want to move on a little bit to talk. If there's any more questions about this, feel free to keep typing them in. I do want to talk a little bit about cocoa farming. I know that's something that Food Empowerment Project has done a lot of with your chocolate list. Somebody in our chat also mentioned that they would just happen to be eating some Food Empowerment Project approved chocolate. So,
oh, cool! Thank you.
Yeah, so it's great that obviously people are using that. I know you have an app as well, and so there's a lot of information about that. Can you talk a little bit about sort of your work on that, and maybe a little bit about Farmworkers as well too, but just a general practice?
Yeah, so the reason why we started working on this is because when I learned about what was happening in Western Africa, and now we're finding out it's becoming more of a problem in Brazil as well, where, and I'll speak specifically to Western Africa, where children as young as 5 years old are carrying heavy machetes and are being exposed to agricultural chemicals again, and carrying heavy bags of cacao pods for the chocolate industry. So children are being forced into this. So they are not paid necessarily. They are slaves, or they're enslaved, I should say, and they are locked in at night sometimes. But they're all doing this for the cacao. And we say, yeah, it's the worst forms of child labor, including slavery, and the worst forms of child labor, specifically things like them carrying heavy bags, hazardous equipment such as the machetes, and of course the agricultural chemicals that they're exposed to while they're spraying it. And in Brazil and areas like that, now you have where the farmers are having to turn to their children to help them work. Because they're not being paid enough. So you have children who are in Western Africa, again, you have children who are trafficked hundreds of miles away from home and maybe don't speak the local dialect. So, my feeling to work on this was basically just saying, even though the chocolate may be vegan, it's not cruelty free if it comes at the hands of slavery or child labor. And when I would start to talk about this, people would ask me what chocolate could I buy. And so we created a chocolate list to help people know which chocolate we would or would not recommend. And we don't base it on any type of certification because some of them have been found to be problematic. We completely go based on country of origin. So we don't recommend cacao from Western Africa or Brazil right now. And so we would make certain exceptions, such as if the workers were the ones who owned the facility and got all the profits. But at this point, slavery is absolutely, and child labor are way too prevalent in those areas. So our list, we update it once a month. The companies have to make at least one vegan chocolate to make our list. And we're fully transparent on our list as to why we do or don't recommend a company. And again, we have it available in the free apps as well, and that's updated every month as well.
And in our chat, we just posted the link to the chocolate list as well too, and that should also lead you to the app. Somebody asked about what the app is called.
Cool.
Can you talk for a second about why you don't go by the labelings or something like fair trade or organic specifically? Can you talk to the panel a little bit about that? But what are some of the issues with that?
Sure. So initially, I stopped doing that when my mentor was telling me when he would go and document what was taking place in Western Africa, he would see that all the cacao was actually, it didn't like, they didn't discriminate when they poured the cacao into the different bags. Like one bag they'd pour some in had a fair trade label, some didn't. They did not, they didn't keep track of it very well. And more recently, you can look at a Washington Post article that came out last year in June, which talked about the problems with the certifications, where you're finding children working in these facilities. A picture that I use in some of my talks with young girls with holding machetes is from a Rainforest Alliance certified farm. So a lot of the certifications have been found to be problematic. And also, I think it's important to remember that these certifications are created by Western entities telling people in the global South what they should or should not be doing versus people in the global South being able to come up with their own solutions on what they think will help that. And more than not, it's going to be actually paying everybody a living income, not just the people who work in the offices at Hershey, but the people who are actually harvesting the cacao and growing the cacao.
That I think is the most sort of interesting part of that, the idea that it's a standard that's set on people rather than having the workers themselves creating it and saying this is what we believe is best for us and how we can best have these best practices. And instead of having that, just having a corporation or a legislative body coming in and telling them instead. I know that's something that FFAC talks a lot about with some of the labeling for organic, free range, cage free, where
Right?
it seems very similar, where the actual regulations and the branding of these, the stamping of these, the egg cartons, or in this case, chocolate of these with these labels is more of a marketing ploy, or it's just like greenwashing, making these products
Exactly.
seem more humane or cruelty free or fair, as the labeling says, to make it seem like it's a better option, better choice. But as you pointed out, it's obviously not necessarily the case.
Yeah, and I feel like vegans are in the best position to recognize this, right? I mean, just because some milk is organic, we're not like, oh gosh, the baby must have had all the mama's milk and this just must be what's left over.
Right.
No, we know organic doesn't mean anything really different except for what that cow is being fed. So
Mhm.
it's like we're in the prime position, I feel, and which again, why Food Empowerment Project is vegan and works on these issues to understand, to be more suspicious about some of these claims that are made in the food industry.
Yeah, and I think that's something hopefully that if everyone who's tuning in kind of gets out of this webinar is to kind of question these things and kind of wonder a little bit more about where these everyday food products are coming from, even if they are vegan, even if they are labeled with under fair trade or organic, free range, all these terms, to just question these things and to look deeper into what they actually come from and what the workers particularly are experiencing in these places.
Exactly.
There were some questions a little bit about some action items or how the individuals can make some changes and impact the system and how we can start what a more sustainable food system would look like. And so I was wondering if we could start segueing into that, talking a little bit about, so what for you, what does a sustainable food system, particularly for farm workers, look like?
Well, this is the favorite part for me, is really talking about what people can do as well. But I mean, in terms of what sustainable looks like to me, that includes everybody in the food chain, right? So the person putting the food in, to the person growing it, to the person picking it, to the drivers taking it somewhere, to the restaurant workers, to the grocery store workers. That means everybody in the full supply chain is treated with dignity and respect and paid their value. And I don't want non-human animals in the food system, right? So it's, for me, it's not even something to talk about because they aren't food. So I don't put them as part of that. Animals should be able to be individuals living free without people, human impact, harming them. So to me, the food system it should be everybody, and that whole thing is able to live and thrive and have equity and be healthy.
And as you mentioned a little bit about ensuring that workers are paid fair wages, what are some of the things that we can do to guarantee their paid fair wages, produce workers? How can we personally, as individuals, help that?
So we follow the lead of the farm workers. So what farm workers are asking for right now is the farm workers in Florida, the Coalition of Immokalee Workers. They're specifically asking people to boycott Publix grocery store. So if you live in the Southeast, you probably know about it, as well as Wendy's. The Wendy's is not paying them one more penny per pound for the tomatoes that they pick. They have found in their work that just one more penny per pound makes a big difference to their lives. And Publix and Wendy's will not pay that to them, nor will they sign the Fair Food Program. So they're asking people to boycott. And I also encourage you, if you are somebody who would typically go to those places, that you contact them and you tell them why you're not going anymore. And it's because you support the boycott called by the Immokalee workers. We also have San Quintin farm workers in Mexico who are asking people to boycott Driscoll's berries. There was actually a call earlier during COVID in the Watsonville area where the Driscoll's company was not treating the farm workers or giving them the safe distance to work, even here in the United States. So they're asking people to boycott Driscoll's. And again, what I would say is boycotting them, absolutely. And make sure that when you go to the grocery store, if it's a grocery store that is selling them, you tell them why you're not going to be buying from them. And that you don't support, Driscoll's berries. And you want them to maybe carry a different kind of berry as well. Berry company.
I think that is such a very powerful thing to do, in addition to not just purchasing those products, but to actively voice why you're not purchasing those products. Because at least my experience, particularly with like supermarkets, restaurants, when people actually comment on these things, like the owners tend to take note of these things. Like they stand out more than if like 10 people don't buy these products, but then one person doesn't buy it, but also tells them exactly why. I think they'll focus more a lot of the times on the vocal minority, or like the person who's actually bringing attention to that.
Exactly. It's funny, where I learned that made more sense was for years and years, we stood out every Sunday at Neiman Marcus in, Union Square in San Francisco, protesting fur. And I started to realize they weren't going to know how many people we were turning away unless people went inside and said something to them. And so now that it kind of reverted how I look at these things, that it's far better to go into these places and tell them, because they value you more because they see you as a customer than if you never went in to begin with.
So in addition to what not to support Driscoll's and the Publix and Wendy's, somebody asked, as a vegan, what they can do when they buy their produce to make sure they're not supporting inhumane farming practices and conditions.
It's difficult, right? And that's why the only thing I can tell you to some degree is to make sure that you're not like we wait for the farm workers to tell us, right? What do you need us to do? And those two farm worker groups are telling us this is what we need you to do. We're not going to make any decisions on any companies because we need the farm workers to tell us what to do. But if you want to help more, then absolutely, I would say that we post a lot on different pieces of legislation that we need people to support for farm workers. There's, New York has a lot of farm workers. Washington, Oregon has a lot of farm workers. So there's a lot of states that almost always has some type of piece of legislation for farm workers. So supporting those is important. Not to plug us, but we do a school supply drive for the children of farm workers every year. We count on people sending us brand new school supplies for their children. So, these are some ways. And if there's any other ways, we will always share it. But right now, we have to take the lead of the farm workers and listen to them and telling us what they need. And right now, those are the ways that we've seen that we can help make a difference. And buying organic helps a little bit because it's one less bad thing to happen to the worker. They're not being doused with agricultural chemicals. We know it's expensive, but it is one thing that somebody can do.
Right. And while you may not want to do it, I will happily plug Food Empowerment Project for you. I think that you do have a lot of resources. I was just on the website earlier, and just there's so many articles that talk about these things and how people can get involved in support. So if you do want to learn more about that, definitely encourage checking out F.E.P's website. Somebody kind of going back a little bit to your interaction with farm workers. How do you talk to them about veganism side of this issues? Do you talk to them, explain to them that animals are not food, or you mentioned that you want the people in Vallejo to want more fruits and vegetables, but how do you address like the access and cultural issue among farm workers?
So two different things. One is it's up to the farm worker organization that we're working with, right? So one of the farm worker, we gave a lot of backpacks filled with school supplies to farm workers in the Central Valley this year. The woman who came and picked them up, she took tons of our literature in Spanish to take down to them. That was her choice, right? It's up to the people. pretty much what we say is that we're a vegan organization, and this is to thank you for feeding us. We don't eat animals, so we're eating more produce, and we do all of this to thank you for feeding us. When it comes to Vallejo, when we are trying to get this worker-owned cooperative there, we were asked, is this co-op, if we get it, is it going to be all vegan? And I said, well, if it's up to me, it would be all vegan, but it's up to you because it's going to be your worker-owned cooperative. But if you make it not vegan, I'll tell you right now, I'm going to be here every weekend telling you why you should go vegan. So then that's my responsibility, right? They just need to be able to have the right to eat and choose. And then it's my responsibility to inform them how animals are treated and give them a taste of some delicious vegan food.
Right, winning them over that way. That's a great way to do it. Somebody asked you a little bit about the school supplies. Are there any concerns about where the school supplies are made? I assume with things like glue but the companies that manufacture them, who I know are not always on the up and up, a lot of instances. And do you have any guidance on donations, especially around school supplies?
Yeah, so we make sure that we don't get any backpacks that have leather in them, that are wool, that are camo. We will not take camo backpacks at all. So those are 3 things we won't take. We also can't take some backpacks based on color because of gang colors. And we also ask people to buy non-toxic. But we make sure that they're vegan. We don't give out crayons anymore.
And there was another question, I believe that was asked a little bit during the registration. And this was more about some of the alternatives. A few weeks ago, FFAC put on a webinar where we talked a little about alternative proteins. So things like Beyond Burgers and Possible Burgers. And we're wondering your thoughts on, our Food Empowerment Project's thoughts on those new products, new technologies that are being developed as alternatives.
Yeah, I mean, we don't support Impossible Burger. Impossible Burger, 1, is not vegan, and 2, it was tested on animals. And so we do not support Impossible Burger, and we don't support any type of, cultured meat, anything that comes from an animal, because we're a vegan organization. And so if something's tested on animals, we won't support it. And if something has any part of an animal, even if somebody wants to claim it's just a cell, it still comes from an animal, and it's still perpetuating this concept that we need to eat animals. Does that answer the question? I'm never quite sure about.
Yeah, so that's kind of addressing the ones that they're based on animals or might have animal testing. What about the plant-based versions of that stuff? So like things that like Tofurkey, for instance, or Beyond.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I feel like people who I'm not somebody who liked meat. I went vegetarian initially when I was in elementary school. But I did love cheese. But I love people who loved eating meat and went vegan anyway. And if I feel like it's not so much the turkey that tastes good as much as it is some of the flavorings that taste good. And so if people can get that they want, I don't think it's a big deal personally. I feel like a veggie burger, I don't eat veggie burgers for my health. So when people say that these Beyond Burger isn't healthy, I'm like, who eats a burger to be healthy anyway? Doesn't really make sense. But I don't see an issue with it being similar. Now, some of us may have a hard time eating things that are so similar, but the fact is that it's not about the taste, it's about the cruelty. I mean, it's 100% about the cruelty. So if that doesn't involve any cruelty, at the end of the day, that's what matters.
Are there any issues with some of the companies that source maybe some of their veggies or vegetables that they use in these products? Or like, I know there's been a few companies who use like non-GMO or GMO soybeans, for instance, in creating some of their products. Do you know of any of those? Or do you?
I don't know as much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's something that people have wondered about too, because it kind of relating to the farm workers, like the components of these alternatives have to be sourced from somewhere. So there are still potential issues with farm workers creating these products.
Yeah, I mean, GMOs are problematic to begin with. When you look at how farmers in the global South have been trying to fight GMOs. So I think that that's a rightful concern for farmers, as well as just the environment and the environmental implications of it.
There's a couple more questions. Do you work with farm workers who work in factory farms or slaughterhouses?
We're a vegan organization, so we see it kind of as a conflict of interest. If we were to work with them, let's say that they're like, hey, we want you to work with us because we want, better breaks. Then they get better breaks, but then what, right? We still don't want the animals to be killed. So it's hard for a vegan organization, I think, to work with them because I see slaughterhouses as something that's horrible for human and non-human animals, and I don't want it to exist at all. Does that mean that I don't want slaughterhouse workers or factory farm workers to be treated well? No, I do think they should be treated well. But I would rather this whole industries not exist. So it's kind of a conflict for Food Empowerment Project to work on those when we don't want, there would be no, how could we ever work together when if they get what it is that they want, we're still going to not want it to exist. So it makes more sense for us to work. And I know that it kind of gets complicated. So if anybody wants me to help unpack that, let me know. But that's kind of how I see it, that like I want to eat more produce. So I want to make sure those farm workers are treated better. But I can't ask for improved conditions in a system that I don't want to exist.
Right. Have you ever had any instances though where you have people who want to transition into like farm produce work instead of doing animal agriculture work or anything? Is that something that can be seen as an alternative, as a way of supporting them transitioning away from that?
We've done outreach at a slaughterhouse here for many years. And every time we try to hand out cards to the workers, the security guards would take them out of their hands and rip them up. So we never were able to, except for one guy who didn't care and then he got fired. But for the most part, when we communicate with them, they're just wanting to tell us what they've gone through.
Right. So there's another question here that's a little bit sort of outside some of the stuff we talked about, but it is, I think, an interesting question. A lot of pharmaceuticals, including flu vaccines, are made of chicken eggs or using animal products, animal testing. How do you personally and how does Food Empowerment Project navigate this?
I don't know that F.E.P has put anything out. We primarily focus on food. I know that I won't take the flu vaccine because I know it comes from eggs, but that's an optional thing, right? That's optional. If I'm, I mean, I guess it's a matter of vaccines. I guess the most thing that would come up probably would be this, if they come up with a COVID vaccine, right? When I would have to think about vaccines. That's going to be well, first of all, I don't think I would trust any coming out of the current administration. So I don't know. But no, I think that there's this point where we all do our best to lessen suffering in the world, right? Like we do our best. But there are some things that may involve the suffering of animals. But I'm just trying to think of like pharmaceuticals. Sometimes they're tested on animals, but a lot of people need them in order to stay alive. And I would say that those are required by law to be tested on animals, and we haven't been able to change that. And I think it's a matter of doing the most that we can. And so if somebody is going to take medication so they can stay alive, but they're going to be not consuming animals, they're going to be fighting the good fight for a more just world, then that's, I don't want to seem like it's so strict that it's not compassionate towards people who have different reasons as to why they need to take medication. I mean, there's bone char and bone in drinking water to help filter our drinking water. There's just some things that we can't get away from it. And I think the goal is more us doing our best to avoid that which we can avoid. And I think sometimes people make too many excuses and then some people take it too much extreme. But I think that for most of us, I hope we're able to say, look, the vast majority I can. And unfortunately, the tires in my car and whatever it is, I can't, but I'm going to do the best that I can do.
Right. And that's, I think, sort of in the definition of veganism as far as possible and practical to really try to make as many changes as possible. I do think there is a flu shot that doesn't have eggs. I think Target has them, the flu block. So there are some, there is an egg-free flu vaccine that is available.
If somebody takes, I'm so scared of the flu vaccines, but if somebody takes it, I'd love to know if they have any side effects or anything.
Great. If there's no more questions, it looks like we've actually managed to answer a lot of them, and we're almost out of time. I do want to kind of finish this up by just saying thank you very much to our speaker, Lauren Ornelas. Just thank you so much for taking the time to talk about your work and Food Empowerment Project's work and the importance of food systems and addressing and acknowledging a lot of these issues. We do really appreciate your time, your effort, all your work on behalf of farm workers. If people want to get involved, obviously encourage them to go into foodispower.org, your website, so you can learn more about all the different things we've talked about, how you can support your organization as well too. We do want to give a reminder, everybody, that we are going to be sharing the recording of today's discussion, everybody in a follow-up email, along with some additional resources and more information, that kind of stuff on everything we talked about. I also want to say thank you to everyone who donated when they registered. As an educational nonprofit, FFSC is made entirely possible by the generosity of our supporters. With your help, we can empower future leaders with the knowledge and skills they need to advocate for a more just, compassionate, and sustainable food system. So thank you so much. We will be posting the link to donate if you want to support our work, support more of these webinars and more of these talks where we can talk more about larger issues that affect not just animals, but farm workers and all the intersections in between. So thank you so much again, Lauren, for joining us. We really appreciate you.
Thanks for having me, and thank you all so much for the great questions and for caring to learn about these issues as part of your looking at vegan food justice.
Yes, thank you everyone to join too. We definitely appreciate it. And thank you so much for all the questions. They were very wonderful. And I hope everybody learned a little bit more about where the food system and where all the impacts that it has, especially on farm workers.
Stay safe, everybody.